In this short presentation, I'm going to introduce you to something called controlled language, which is used in a range of different applications, including machine translation, where its use can reduce the amount of post-editing that possibly needs to be applied after the translation has taken place. So, controlled language can be defined as a version of a human language that embodies explicit restrictions on vocabulary, grammar and style for the purpose of authoring technical documentation. Now, most controlled languages are based on English, and as you see from the definition, the purpose is to restrict the range of grammatical structures or constructions and the range of vocabulary that an author might normally select from. And the aim of that is to make the text, for example, easier to translate. So, use of a controlled language will enforce authoring rules. In other words, will oblige authors to write their texts conforming to a particular set of rules. And the purpose is to produce texts which are as clear and as unambiguous as possible. Controlled language can be quite strict in terms of the rules it imposes, and typically these rules would include use of short rather than long sentences, a standardization of spelling and punctuation, a use of simple tenses rather than compound ones, and the use of active rather than passive verb forms. Typically, a controlled language will only contain in its core a small proportion of the total number of words contained in an ordinary language. Each word which is permitted in a controlled language will only be allowed to appear with one particular meaning, and it will be assigned to a particular part of speech. So the word record or record, which can be a verb or a noun, as you know, it may be specified that it's only permitted to use that word as a noun, a record of something, make a record of something, so that if you wanted to say that you wanted to record something, as in you wanted to note something down, you'd have to say something like you were going to make a record of it, thus using the word record in the permitted noun sense. In the context of machine translation, the use of controlled language can be thought of as a type of pre-editing. Last week we were looking at post-editing. So this is pre-editing, in other words, changing the text before it even reaches the machine translation engine. Its use is broader than simply machine translation. It can be used to improve communication among non-native speakers of a language, and more generally it's used as a way of authoring technical documentation, particularly in a large organization where the workforce speak a wide range of languages, and where for most of them English will not be their first language, and so clarity and lack of confusion, lack of ambiguity are going to be really important issues. And also it is used in machine translation. So in machine translation, as a way of pre-editing a text before the machine translation takes place, the use of controlled language is generally for the purpose of reducing the need to post-edit. So the more pre-editing that takes place, the theory is that the less the need will be for post-editing also to take place. What's particularly important here is to limit lexical ambiguity. Humans are not always aware of the wide range of ambiguity that exists in texts, but when you are getting a computer program to try and understand a sentence, then it will see all kinds of other ambiguity which a human would not generally pay any attention to. Use of controlled languages is particularly valuable in a multilingual translation project, the idea being that you change or you control one set of source text documents, and then that will have an impact on the quality of the output in as many languages as are included in the translation project. We haven't yet come on to the use of translation memory, but if the material you're translating is written in a controlled language, then that will increase the efficacy of a TM system, typically, simply because of the increased source text standardization that its use will lead to. So these controlled languages are not particularly well known, and they tend to be used in large organizations, each of which may create its own controlled language. So here are some of them. Caterpillar Technical English, ASD Simplified Technical English, Cant Controlled English, and that's specifically intended for use with machine translation. So as I said, that this technology is very largely associated with large corporations, and it exists in the form of style guides and often also interactive authoring tools which will correct or draw the author's attention to incorrectly formed sentences, and then the author obviously will have to go back and correct them. As I've mentioned, most controlled languages are based on English, although there are controlled versions of other languages in existence as well. So there are a few references. Thank you very much for your attention.